It seems like
It all started when I was 7 years old. I used to live in a small neighborhood with a large amount of woods next to our town. One day, my parents left me at home with my brother while they dropped my other brother off at football practice. That was the starting point. They had to stop abruptly in the middle of the road in the woods when they were driving back home. And that memory has been bothering my dad. Even now, he said. He said that he definitely saw something that day and remembered what it looked like. It was an extremely thin figure, around 7 to 8 feet tall. He was sure that it wasn't a bear because when it saw their car, the thing stood up on 2 legs and ran away with a strange form. It had lots of blotches on certain parts of its body, while other parts were losing hair or had none at all. And its back looked broken and poorly arched when it ran back into the woods. When my parents had warned me about it, even then, I never knew what it was. After I turned 10 years old, one day I had to stay home alone while my parents went to visit my uncle. So I invited 7 of my friends over who I'll call Bella, Riley, Max, John, Kayla, Shannon, and Penelope. We had fun playing video games, watching movies, and things like that until midnight. Then I suddenly remembered that thing my dad had seen a few years ago. Hey, why don't we go searching for that creature? Looking at each other, we thought it would be a fun idea to try. So we grabbed our flashlights and headed out into the woods. Once we walked in, everything mysteriously got way creepier, and the weird sounds got louder. The whole area was totally dark, and the fear of getting lost was affecting all of us. Suddenly, we heard a loud crunching noise. We shined the flashlight in the direction of the sound, and finally, we saw it. There were some dead carcasses of deer, and I could see that there was some other big animal. At first, I thought it might be a bear that was eating off of those carcasses. However, that's not what it was. The thin, hairy, and almost 8-foot-tall creature was there. It looked at us with its blood-stained, sharp teeth and bloodshot eyes. Then it slowly got up and let out a penetrating howl. Not caring if branches hit us or if we got cut or bruised, we all screamed and ran away through the woods. We didn't know whether it was chasing after us or not, but we didn't care. We just needed to get back home as soon as possible. Finally, we jumped over the creek that was right in front of my house, ran up the hill into my house, and then locked the door. Everybody all right? Breathing hard, I looked at my friends, and then I realized something. Penelope was gone. We must have lost her in the woods somewhere as we ran away. Being terrified, I pulled out my cell phone with trembling hands, called 911, and told them about our situation. Within 15 minutes, paramedics, police, and our parents arrived. We explained again what we had seen and what happened to Penelope. The police searched the entire forest, but never found the thing or Penelope either. The only thing that had been discovered was some bloodstains of hers. Well, I'm 12 years old now, and none of us speak about what happened that day. The search for Penelope has been going on, but I'm positive that she's dead. Not just me. We all do. I recently did research on the thing and noticed that many other people had gone missing in my woods, mostly kids, and Penelope's disappearance made her the 8th child to go missing in those woods. I now no longer go into my woods because I'm afraid that if I do, that thing will find me one day, and I will end up like Penelope.
My name is Caitlin. This incident happened when I was 14 years old, and I will never forget this memory. One day, I was at home alone at my house. My mom was still at the office late at night, and my 2 siblings were at my grandparents' house, which was kind of far away from my home. At first, I was just enjoying my time alone, watching Netflix and doing some fun stuff. However, after a while, I got pretty bored, so I decided to invite some of my friends over. I asked my mom for permission and then called my friends to invite them over. A few moments later, while I was waiting for them, I heard a loud bang upstairs. I was sure that there was no one else upstairs. So I stood up and looked up the stairs with an anxious look on my face. When I was near the stairs, I could see that one of my dolls had fallen. I picked it up, and when I straightened my back, something caught my attention. A little girl was standing upstairs. Well, I could feel that she was staring at me, even though I couldn't see her face clearly due to the darkness. I was terrified, and then someone rang the doorbell. I ran to see who it was, and luckily, my friends had arrived. Thank God, it was a moment of relief that my friends came over at the right time. Soon, I got my mind off of the girl I saw. We sat down in the living room and had fun talking with each other. An hour later, one of my friends suggested that we should take some pictures together, so we gathered around one another. We took several selfies while laughing and chatting. Later, as we scrolled through the pictures, we found something. There was a little girl standing behind our couch. What made us even more terrified was the fact that she had no face. I mean, her face was just an empty darkness. No eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Being terrified, I told Cassie to delete that picture right away. However, she said that something was wrong with her cell phone. I snatched the phone out of her hands and tried to delete it. But no matter what we tried, we couldn't delete the picture. Then we heard loud thumps. It sounded like someone's footsteps were coming from upstairs, and our light was flickering on and off at the same time. We thought that we couldn't stay inside anymore, so we rushed outside in a hurry. One of my friends, Christina, suddenly pointed at my bedroom window and said that there was someone in there. I raised my eyes up and followed her finger, and there she was. It was the same faceless girl we had seen in the picture. My friends and I screamed. I called my mom and explained everything. My mom couldn't believe what I told her, so she made me calm down and said that she would be home in 5 minutes. After she arrived home, she searched the entire house, but she couldn't find any trace of the girl. I hoped that it was just our imaginations. However, we soon decided to move out of the house because I kept seeing the girl after that incident. It was the same. We finally moved, and from then on, my mom never wanted me to be home alone, so I always stayed with my siblings. I still have no clue why the girl haunted me, but I think it was because she wanted us to get out of the house. Well, I'm just glad that I don't see that girl in my new house. This happened to me while I was on my way home one night. I was living in an apartment at the time. When I arrived on the first floor of my building, there was a piece of paper hanging on the wall that said that the elevator was out of service. No, not again, I said to myself. I lived on a pretty high floor, so without any other choice, I had to walk up the stairs. I was walking up the stairs out of sheer desperation, and all of a sudden, I heard something. Then I began to feel uneasy. I knew that crimes often occurred around my neighborhood, especially targeting people who were alone. When I listened closely, I could hear a pair of men's shoes and a pair of women's high heels walking at the same time. I assumed that it was a couple. You guys are having a hard time like me. I'm struggling to walk up the stairs, especially this late at night. I thought to myself. I sighed with relief and turned my head around. However, I will never forget what I saw at that moment. There was a man who was crawling with a pair of men's shoes on his feet and a pair of high heels on his hands. He was crawling towards me. This happened a few years ago in the neighborhood I grew up in. When I was around 6 years old, there was an incident where an old man who lived right in front of my house was murdered by a robber. Not only did the robber steal all his money, but he also stabbed him brutally with a knife and then ran away. According to the police, the crime scene was as horrible as it sounds, and unfortunately, to this day, the robber still hasn't been caught. When they moved the old man's dead body and passed by my house, my mom covered my eyes with her hands so that I wouldn't see it. Nevertheless, I could see my neighbor's face through the gap between my mom's fingers. After that, even after a few months had passed, the old man's house wasn't sold. It was because there were a few strange rumors spreading around the neighborhood about his house. Some said that people would always hear the old man's coughing and sobbing coming from inside whenever it rained. 10 years later, all of the people who moved into his house had to leave, and now his house is being used as a warehouse. When I was in high school, I was crazy about a boy band and used to stay up late at night watching their videos. Because of this, I used to fall asleep at around 3 or 4 a.m. The town I lived in was sort of a new city under construction, so it was really quiet and there was no one outside during that time. One night, it was around 3 a.m., I suddenly heard a woman singing outside. It was an old song, and the strange thing was that the woman was singing just one part of the song over and over again. She didn't move on to the next section. She would just start singing, pause for a minute, and then continued singing again. Out of curiosity, I opened the window and was about to sing the next verse of the song to surprise her. However, before that, I sent a text message to my friend. "Hey, someone is singing outside and keeps repeating the same part. LOL, should I sing along with her?" Not long after, my friend responded, and then I had to shut the window quietly because I was terrified. The text said, "Don't do that. That's a ghost. When ghosts find someone to harm, they first sing and then wait for the person to sing along."
There's a building that has a parking garage with a bicycle parking area on the lowest level that me and a group of my friends like to hang out at and skateboard. I called up my friends Jordan, Dorian, Jalen, and Aditya one Sunday to ask if they wanted to go skateboarding with me at the garage. They all agreed, so we met up at my house and rode our skateboards and longboards through the unkept paths between the apartment buildings and arrived at the garage. We waited for a car to drive in and set off the sensor to open the garage door. Then we tailgated in. When we got inside, we rode our boards around, just practicing some skills. Eventually, we rode down to the lower level and sat in the bicycle parking area to have a break and drink some soda. All of a sudden, a car pulled up and parked in a spot that was visible from the bicycle parking area. The car sat in the spot with its engine running and the driver still sitting inside. Then another van pulled up and shut off its engine in the middle of the road. Both drivers got out and met each other halfway. They were both tall and intimidating with their hoods up. One driver passed the other driver money, but then they suddenly began to argue. We all watched in awe as they flung their hands around dramatically and started to shout. We couldn't make out what they were saying since the loud echo distorted their voices. We all froze as the van driver pulled out a gun and shot the other driver in the throat. The driver collapsed, blood pooling around him. The van's driver yelled something, and then we saw two other guys get out of the van. one tossing the body into the back seat, and the other began wiping up the blood. Something was going on here, and I could tell we were in danger. Dorian whispered that we had to leave, now. We all began to quietly grab our skateboards and started hiding behind a wall. But the blood-cleaning guy spotted Jalen as he was making his way over and yelled to the driver. The van started up, and right then, Aditya screamed. We all threw down our skateboards and began pushing away as fast as possible. I could hear so many noises in my ears, like skateboards moving, voices shouting and screaming, and the roaring van behind us. Dorian was on an electric skateboard and was taking the lead as we wound around the ramps, rising to the next level. Jordan was next to me, and Aditya was close behind us on his scooter. Jalen, who had been the last to leave, was falling behind, and we could see the van speeding up behind him. I yelled for him to run to the side, and he popped his skateboard into his hands and took a sharp turn to the left, running up a fire escape. The van screeched around the corner as Dorian began approaching the garage door. And that's when I realized something. We had to wait for a car to trigger the sensor and open the door. I yelled at Dorian to take the staircase to the right, and he did. Jordan and I hopped off our skateboards and ushered Aditya into the staircase. We burst out into some dirty apartment floor, and I quickly called Jalen. He picked up and told us he was outside the apartment building by the main road. We held our skateboards and ran through the apartment floor until we found the fire escape. Then we managed to run outside and met Jalen, where we called the cops. After the cops arrived, they started to search the parking garage. They couldn't find any traces nor the cars there, so they decided to check the security footage. The footage revealed the van's license plate was covered with duct tape, but they did catch the license plate of the car of the driver who'd been shot. They said they'd keep us updated and gave us a lift home. Since then, we've never seen the van again or gotten any important information from the cops. My friends and I have recently resorted to the much safer and public skate park nearby and never visited that garage again. This is a story that happened to me not too long ago. It was Halloween. There was a big 2-story house in our town which was rumored to be haunted. Out of curiosity, one of my best friends, Carlos, and I decided it would be a good idea to test out this rumor. So we went to that house for trick or treat. It was about 11:45 p.m., and it took us a while to get to the house as it was a bit far away from the other houses. When we arrived at the house, we rang the doorbell. A man who looked as if he was in his mid-30s suddenly came out. He opened the door almost right away. He had a cigarette in his hand. I could see that he was dressed in a hoodie and ripped jeans, and he looked kind of tired. My friend mentioned the rumor about his house being haunted. We laughed out loud, but he didn't reply to anything we said. He just stared at us, and then he said, "You kids are almost a little late for Halloween. It's going to end in 2 minutes." Well, he was right. It was almost 12 a.m. He then told us the candy was in his room and offered for us to come in. We sat on the living room couch waiting for the man who had gone upstairs. However, when he came back, he insisted on us going upstairs because he had Reese's chocolate, which was my favorite at the time. So, being a pretty mindless teenager, we took him up on the offer. We went upstairs following behind him and went into one of the dimly lit rooms. Right at that instant, I could see that there were a lot of different kinds of knives in the room. It looked as if the man were collecting knives. We thought it was a pretty cool hobby. The man approached us and gave us each 2 pieces of chocolate. Although he still didn't say anything, we thanked him and turned around to go downstairs. All of a sudden, Carlos screamed in pain and fell down the stairs. I turned around and saw the man was holding what appeared to be a red knife, which was probably one from his collection. With mixed emotions, my adrenaline immediately kicked in. I tried to punch the man in the face, but he turned back and then stabbed my leg. I barely managed to hold back the pain and literally knocked him out with 5 punches. The man collapsed. I took the knife out of my leg and started limping, holding Carlos in one arm. We finally escaped from that house. I could see that there was blood all over Carlos's back. With shaking hands, I called the police. As soon as they arrived, they arrested the man after he had regained consciousness. The ambulance took me and Carlos to the hospital. I wasn't hurt too bad, but Carlos was apparently stabbed twice in the back and bled out a lot. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks to recover. Sometime after I got out of the hospital, the police officer reported to my parents that the man had apparently been a registered sex offender and had raped a few children before. Luckily, he was sent to jail right after they arrested him. After all of that, I never went inside a stranger's house again. And to this day, I'm still afraid of what would have happened if I wasn't able to hold back the pain of being stabbed and had failed to escape from that man.
This happened not long after we moved into our house in 2003. It was a nice and big house, which was made in the 1950s. One day I was in my backyard watering the grass, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made me pause. There was a man standing next to the shrubs near our backyard's wall. He was dressed like a carpenter. His head looked like it was tilted sideways, and his body was slightly facing our fences sideways. Then he saw me and smiled kindly at me. At first, I thought he was fixing someone's house, and that it was his job. However, only after he faced me, I realized that wasn't the case. When I looked at him with narrowed eyes, I noticed that his neck was visibly broken, causing his head to awkwardly tilt to the side. I then saw that he waved at me once, but I was too shocked to scream at the time. After I regained consciousness, I looked around, but he had vanished and had literally faded away. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. Noise was coming from my ceiling. It sounded like someone wearing construction boots was walking very slowly. I started to freak out, thinking that it might be a thief. However, I suddenly realized that that part of the roof was so thin, which meant nobody could walk on it. The steps abruptly stopped after a while, and when I felt at ease, I heard another horrible sound. I heard a sharp scream that sounded like a man, then a loud thud, as if someone had dropped on my ceiling, followed after. I covered my head with a blanket. My hands and whole body shivered, and after 10 minutes of nothing, I peeked outside. It was completely quiet. I saw and heard nothing, but I couldn't fall back asleep that night. The next morning, I started to look up the history of the house. To my surprise, it turned out that there was a report about the carpenter I met a few days before in the backyard. In 1958, he had been hired to fix the roof while the owners were on vacation. However, the carpenter had fallen abruptly through the weak spot on the roof while he was working and had broken his neck. He couldn't scream for help, and no one ever knew what happened to him as the owners were gone for 2 weeks. He was finally found when they came back, but had already died. This happened right above my bedroom. Suddenly, I felt bad for the poor guy, and I guess he's still looking after things. Since then, I've seen him sometimes, but I'm no longer afraid of him.
This story is about when I first moved to the city and joined the company. Our company was running a dormitory at the time, and I was the one from the countryside, so I decided to stay in the dormitory. One day after work, I came back to the dormitory and was eating my dinner with the TV on. It was almost midnight after working overtime, I was laughing and watching some comedy shows, and then I felt a sudden strangeness. You know, like it feels like someone is staring at you. Feeling weird, I turned my head toward the window, and I couldn't move as my whole body stiffened with a tremendous chill. I couldn't even scream. The woman's face was stuck in the window as I turned casually to look. And she was staring at me without any movement. Now, let's think about it. The windows in the dorm were not even small. It was just the size of a normal person's upper body. But look, a face big enough to fill that size of a window? Can you imagine what it was? And what was scarier was, I was on the 5th floor at the time. How could she even stand over there, staring at me? I was frozen. I couldn't run away. I could only just watch her glaring eyes. It was lucky that I could move as the ghost disappeared the moment someone knocked on my door. One of my coworkers in the next room came to my room saying that he had something urgent to do. And when he looked at my pale face, he asked me if I was okay. So I explained to him what I had just saw. And then his face looked a little stiff. Well, he didn't say anything anymore, but I knew it. I was sure. I'm not the only one who saw her here. Anyway, something strange has happened to me since then. Sometimes when people get together and talk about ghost stories, I suddenly start to feel nauseous, like ghosts are coming to see me. For example, one day I was with my friends in a restaurant, and as soon as they started talking about ghosts, my skin turned pale, and I started sweating all over my body. At first, they thought I was lying or trying to prank them. But when I looked at the door with a serious look on my face and told my friends not to keep telling those stories, they all had to shut up. I think something's wrong with me. So, anyone who's watching this story, I hope you guys always check out the window, especially when you're alone in your house. Always.
I used to live with my grandmother, who died a few years ago. My grandmother had suffered a cerebral infarction during her lifetime, so she couldn't use her arms or legs at all, and she couldn't even speak. She could only mumble and grunt. Because I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, I felt sorry for her whenever I saw her. One day, my family gathered together at my house to celebrate a big holiday. While we were eating delicious food and chatting with each other, my grandmother was sitting alone in her room. A few hours had passed, and it was time for everyone to go home. So my relatives said their goodbyes. However, my grandmother was still in her room at that time. So I stayed with her. I sat next to her, just in case. "Grandma, do you want to go outside and say goodbye to everyone?" I asked, looking at her face. Then Grandma slowly turned her head towards me and opened her mouth. "I'm embarrassed." At that instant, I couldn't believe that she spoke with such clear and accurate pronunciation. A few years later, after my grandma had died, I told my family what happened that day when I was at the funeral hall, but no one believed me. Today, I'm going to talk about a story that I read somewhere. A few years ago, a body was found in the countryside. It was especially difficult to identify the victim or the perpetrator of that incident because the body had been dead for quite a long time, and to make matters worse, the bones had changed and were bleached. However, the police found one strange thing in this difficult situation. Only one finger from its body remained completely intact. They asked the National Forensic Service, and they finally completed the identification on the body's finger. Furthermore, they succeeded to arrest the criminal as a result of the investigation. It turned out that the assailant was her roommate. They said that he beat her to death on a rainy day and buried her in the mountain behind their house. After that, the detective who was in charge said in his interview, "When you're in charge of a case, there are often things that occur that can't be explained. However, I can tell you that ghosts really exist." I'll admit that what I'm about to tell you is not that creepy. My grandmother passed away not too long ago. After staying 3 days in the funeral home, we were supposed to go to the cemetery following her cremation. They said it would take about an hour, so my mom told me to take a nap in the car until the cremation was done. Since I was the one who had to drive later, I went back to my car alone and fell asleep. However, not long after, someone started shaking me. I heard my name, so I slowly opened my eyes, and my grandmother was sitting next to me. "Grandma?" I asked, rubbing my eyes, and she smiled at me. "Yes, it's me. Your grandpa is calling me. I'll go first, so stop sleeping and get up." I really missed her. Crying in my dream, I suddenly woke up with a surge of longing for her. I kept crying and then came out of the car. At that moment, I saw my family walking towards me, carrying a box of grandmother's ashes and her picture. I immediately told my mom about my dream, and then she patted me on the back and said this: "I guess Grandma wanted to say goodbye before she left. Maybe you were the only one who was sleeping, so she wanted to say goodbye to you."
One evening, I was looking for an internet cafe because I needed to send a few emails. I spotted one in an old building. The sign said it was on the 6th floor. When I walked through the entrance, there was a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, I stepped inside. In a lot of Asian countries, many buildings do not have a 4th floor. The number 4 is considered bad luck because the word 4 sounds almost the same as the word for death. When it stopped and the doors opened, I was about to step out when I realized that something was wrong. The hallway was in total darkness. By the light emanting from the elevator, I could make out a random piece of furniture covered with white cloth. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought I might have gotten off on the wrong floor, so I checked the buttons, but none of them were lit up. There was nothing to indicate which floor I was on. Just then, I noticed something moving at the end of the darkened hallway. I couldn't quite make out what it was, but it looked like a person dressed in some type of gown. The figure was moving slowly down the hallway towards the elevator. It creeped me out, and in a panic, I started pressing the closed door button. All of a sudden, the light in the elevator flickered and turned dark. I was plunged into the pitch darkness. I was so freaked out I almost wet myself. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the lights flickered back on. The doors closed. The elevator jolted back to life and began to ascend